Following the most devastating war in history, a conflict that was long hidden under an uneasy surface arose again between the two world's most powerful countries at that time. Even though it was a Cold War because there was no direct contention between the two powers, there were battles in most other parts of the world, and the conflict almost culminated into a nuclear war. As Churchill rightly said, an iron curtain had descended over Europe. It must be clear, however, that the USA and the USSR did not only become rivals between 1945 and 1950. To determine the origins of this conflict engaging so many historians and history classes, we must look further back to the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 and the following Russian Civil War. There, the United States already supported the White Army to defeat the communist revolutionaries. After the communist takeover, the ideologies of the two world's largest powers entirely opposed each other and were the driving force behind most of Truman's and Stalin's actions post-World War II. Ideology is the belief in what the political, economic and social order of a country should be. The USA was capitalist, believed in a free market and democracy. Most important leaders at that time, such as Truman, were credal supporters of this ideology and often stood as a symbol for those. So also the leaders' personalities come into play. Equally, Stalin stood for Russia's belief in communism and a planned economy. This complete opposition of ideologies led to a row of events that eventually caused the Cold War. Furthermore, most fears were not understood by both powers in the post-World War II period. For example, Russia's desire for a buffer zone in Eastern Europe and the fear of a new German state were not understood by Truman, as they were attacked in both world wars by the latter and suffered severe casualties. In the early 1940s, only a threat to their powers such as Germany could ally the USA and the USSR, and when Hitler was defeated, the conflict inevitably arose again. This period after the Second World War, however, is generally referred to as the outbreak of the Cold War, and for this purpose this movie will only be dealing with the years of 1945 to 1950. The foundation of many disputes over Eastern Europe in the road to the Cold War was the Yalta Conference in February 1945. It was at the same time the last war conference, and somehow the first post-war conference, as Germany and even Japan were considered as defeated by that time. Instead of achieving peace, however, the conference's ambiguous clauses only laid a base for several misunderstandings between Soviet and American policies in Europe, notably Germany and Poland. This eventually led Russia into taking over the whole of Poland and already in April the whole of Eastern Germany, including its capital Berlin. Using the same perfidious policy as he did in the 1920s in Russia, Stalin took over most eastern countries, such as Romania and Bulgaria. He later also gained control over Czechoslovakia in February 1948 and Yugoslavia after a long struggle with communist leader Tito. He did not impose any occupation on Finland, Greece, Turkey and Austria. However, the Eastern European situation increased the tensions between the two powers significantly. More confusion arose when Roosevelt died before the Potsdam Conference. The aim of this conference was to settle the Germany and Poland issue. With certain conditions such as elections, Russia was granted Poland. Even though an agreement about the division into four occupation zones of Germany and Austria, including their capitals, was made, and the conference was seen as a success, neither country realized what problems those divisions would later create. At the same time, the USA exploded an atomic bomb for the first time over inhabited territory, the cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In its attempt to intimidate Russia, the USA with its nuclear monopoly only provoked the USSR aggression, and the Russians felt disappointed as they were not informed about the project known as the Manhattan Project. Another important factor leading to the Cold War was Stalin's February 1946 speech and its aftermath. Even though it was a typical communist speech, talking about 5-year plans and defeating the evil capitalism, its impact was much larger than anyone would have expected. It caused George Kennan, a credal capitalist, to respond with a policy proposal to the US government. There, Stalin's well-known claim that the ideological struggle would eventually result in a war was seen as a declaration of war. The long telegram was the theoretical base of the following US policies as well as Churchill's Fulton speech. Interestingly, Missouri was Truman's home state in the center of the US and politically quite balanced. Truman Doctrine followed in March 1947, claiming that $400 million of military aid would be needed to prevent the spread of communism in Greece, Turkey, and other European countries. The Marshall Plan aimed to solve the same issue economically. Imposed in June 47, the USA financially supported Europe in order to benefit from their economy and expand their sphere of influence, while preventing a communist spread in those countries. Both of those policies were seen as an offense by the USSR. The division of Germany and its capital Berlin also significantly contributed to the worsening relations between Russia and the United States. As a response to the imposition of the Deutschmark in West Germany, which was an economic barrier for the Soviets, the latter cut off the road and train supply routes to West Berlin. The Allies thus launched the Berlin Airlift, which had to supply 2,000 tons of necessities to the capital each day, through 3 air corridors to 3 airports, 1 in each sector. Through the city's strong will and the Allies' fear from giving up the city, the airlift was a major success in Cold War history, and drew the people's sympathies towards the Western powers. Even though the Berlin blockade failed, nowhere else than in Berlin the two countries' military came that close to each other. The slightest spark there, or simply the impatience of a tank driver, could have turned the Cold War into a hot crisis. By the end of the 1940s, the communist takeover under Mao and the Korean War increased the tensions between the powers even more. In 1949, the detonation of the first Soviet atom bomb set off the arms race, and the war started. As cold as it was, the conflict between two countries was now a threat to humanity. Thank you for watching this podcast about how the USSR and the USA became rivals in the period of 1945 to 1950.